Thank you so much for being here this evening. I know some of you worked this morning at least, and I would like to take this moment to share with you my 30-second elevator speech. You know, all speakers should have a 30-second elevator speech, and one that you can give between the floors of two landings. And my husband said, I'm really excited that you can do 30 seconds and stop. But mine is, I love dentistry, I love the people in dentistry, and I love to see them achieve a higher level of success, from the senior doctor to the high school helper. I just think everybody has potential, and so my goal is for them to reach it, and that's my 30-second elevator speech. I want to start off by asking a question. How many of you in this room have been concerned about the future of dentistry, or are concerned about the future of dentistry, or are a little bit nervous about, you hear rumors like, oh, the corporations are taking over, the mom and pop practices are a thing of the past? And how many of you in this room have had some of those concerns? May I see your honest hands, please? I think everybody in this room is raising their hands, and I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, dentistry is alive and well, and dentistry is absolutely going to be a profession that other professionals wish they had become part of instead of the one that they have chosen. So I don't think that there is a lot to worry about. I do see a lot of changes, and I do see a lot of corporations, and I do see a lot of young dentists. I love speaking to the students. Dr. Brown and I both spoke recently at VCU in Richmond, and their biggest concern is, what are my options? And please tell me the pros and cons of choosing one option over the other. And then the last time I spoke, for only an hour, they said, Mrs. Miles, you give us practical information, like how to hire the person that's going to answer your telephone, how to hire the person that's going to process your insurance, and how to hire, when do you hire your first hygienist if you start in a practice? How do you teach these people? And I've always been of the mindset, and I hope you will be, your team makes or breaks your practice. You can be the finest clinician on the face of the earth, and without a great team who is excited about dentistry, who is excited about their doctor and his or her ability to perform ideal dentistry for every single patient, and a person that believes in you so much that they will walk on hot coals and just absolutely go take a bullet for you when it comes to defending your fees. And I think that that's one of the big challenges of your administrative team. Patients have two problems. Number one, they don't really want to be in a dental practice for the most part. And number two, they certainly hate to spend money on dentistry. Have you experienced any of that in your own practice? But I believe that we as educators and you as dentists and team members can make such a significant difference by making the patients more aware of the benefit to the buyer. And that's the whole thing. I left dentistry for 6 years when my husband was in the Air Force and our children were small. And I worked in sales. And one of the things that I learned in sales, which I thought, gee, you can use this in dentistry for sure, is until there is a benefit to the buyer, there is zero case acceptance. So we are so short on outlining the patient's short and long-term benefits that oftentimes they say no to the treatment that they deserve. And one of the things that is also very, very obvious is that the team members are not as well educated as they should be. So there are so many courses, and that brings me to the 5 necessities which I want to run through. Number one in your course outline, if you'll turn to that page in your workbook, please, is you must have outstanding clinical skills. These are outstanding clinical skills of the doctor and outstanding clinical skills for your hygienist. How many hygienists today are still practicing Prophy Palace dentistry? And there are so many wonderful educators that will help your hygienist become a 21st century hygienist. And in doing so, they absolutely become the person that sets the stage for case acceptance on the clinical side of the practice. So if you have a hygienist who hasn't been updated and isn't practicing 21st century hygiene, it's a whole different world than it was 10 years ago. So your doctor has to have his or her clinical skills, your hygienist and your clinical assistants. Every person in your practice has to have outstanding clinical skills. Number 2 on my list is business systems for success, and we're going to have just a few moments that I can touch on each one. First of all is scheduling. How you engineer your schedule determines 2 things about your practice. It determines your success level, and it also determines your stress level. If you are still throwing 30 names on a page and hoping you get out for lunch, or throwing 30 names on a page and hope you live through it, then that is the way we scheduled years and years ago. Under scheduling, I want you to write down 3 numbers. And this is how I teach scheduling when I have 2 or 3 hours to do so. But the 3 numbers that I want you to write down: 60, 30, 10. 60, 30, 10. Because if we don't know where that doctor is throughout the day, we cannot engineer the schedule instead of just double booking the doctor or having gaps in the schedule. 2 things are very, very important in scheduling, and that is we have to know where the doctor is at all times. You should be in column 1, chair 1, primary treatment room, 60% of the day. You should be in column 2 with dental assistant number 2, and that is 30% of the day. And you should be in hygiene doing follow-up preventive care exams 10% of the day. So 60, 30, and 10. I know where my doctor is all day long. Now we can overlap you doctors, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. We cannot put an anterior root canal beside a composite because both of those are doctor times. So we have to know how to engineer. We also have to know our Dental Practice Act. So 2 things that you must have. Number 1, you must know where the doctor is at all times. And number 2, you have to make sure that the dental assistants are very well trained in not only clinical skills, but in communication skills. When you finish with a procedure, doctor, and you pat that patient on the shoulder and you say to the patient, we call it passing the power, Mrs. Jones, my dental assistant Cindy's going to take over now. She'll explain exactly what we've done today and answer any questions you may have. Now, she can't do that without proper training. But doctors, where you lose 7 minutes per patient per day, you figure up what is 7 minutes of your time times 30 patients, 210 minutes? So you are losing 7 minutes per patient because you get tied up when your part of the procedure is finished. And that's why we have to delegate pre- and post-treatment discussions to your very talented dental assistants. And when our doctor said Cindy's going to take over now, she came around, sat down on the doctor's chair, pretended this is the only patient she would see today, and she explained exactly what took place, exactly what their home care instructions were going to be, and also she told the patient what to expect on their next visit. And more importantly, she told the patient what could happen if we don't proceed with that treatment. That's where we fall short. We are not explaining to the patient what can happen if they decide not to have the treatment. So your dental team members are setting the stage for case acceptance every time they answer the telephone, every time they greet a patient warmly, every time they talk to a patient chairside, every time they dismiss a patient at the front desk. They are setting the stage for case acceptance. So clinical skills, you must have outstanding clinical skills and you must have outstanding business systems. A couple of things under scheduling I don't want to forget. If you are in practice 30 months or 30 years, you must leave flex time in a busy day to accommodate 4 types of patients. Number 1, you must be able to get an emergency in. Emergency patients are your greatest missionary. They will refer 2 times, 4 times as many patients to you because you helped them when they were in need. I can't get over how many practices over the last 30 years I've consulted in where the team members hate emergencies. The doctor doesn't like emergencies because they screw up our day. They don't have to mess up your day. You need to leave emergency flex time in your schedule so that your scheduling coordinator can say, Mrs. Miles, how long has that tooth been bothering you? Is it sensitive to hot or cold? Do you have swelling? And finally, the magic words, how soon can you be here? We built an entire practice in Richmond, Virginia from a scratch practice. A dentist who was he wasn't just out of dental school. I think he was in the Army 4 years in Germany as a dentist, and then he taught full-time at MCV. So he wasn't that young. He was 34, I think, when he started his first practice. And it was amazing how we built that practice by accommodating patients in need. So please leave emergency flex time. When is the worst time? The hour before lunch and the last 2 hours of the day should be totally off limits for all emergencies except trauma. Why? Because you won't ever have lunch and you won't ever go home. And that's why dental team members dislike emergencies. So I think in dental school they might have taught you doctors that the best time is right before lunch and at the end of the day. So when is the best time? Mid-morning, column 2, assistant 2, 30 minutes, and mid-afternoon. Mid-morning and mid-afternoon, column 2, chair 2 with assistant number 2. And so you need to leave emergency flex time. You need to leave new patient flex time. We believe that the adult new patient should be seen by the doctor first. And the second dental assistant's title is the new patient coordinator. That is what we used as fillers, F-I-L-L-E-Rs. Filler appointments are those procedures that can be done by the second assistant 80% of the time without the doctor being in the treatment room. So we use the new patient experience to fill the time that the doctor wasn't doing operative 30% of the day. So 70% of Sherry's schedule was actually adult new patient interviews. And our doctor saw the new patient first. Let me assure you, when the dentist sees the new patient first, instead of the hygienist, not only do you have fillers and your second dental assistant is producing a couple thousand a day with your help, not only will that chair become so productive and so valuable, but the other thing that happens is your case acceptance doubles. You cannot develop a relationship on a new patient adult going in at the end of a hygiene visit. You can't develop what you need as a first relationship. So, if people ask me, what were some of the big changes that you made in practices, more than 1,000 practices that I consulted over the years, I would have to say engineering their schedule and delegating to their talented team would be number one. And the next flex time that you need is new patient flex time. Heaven forbid if someone calls your practice and wants to come in as a new patient, and you have to put them off. And so we left new patient flex time. If we knew we had 20 new patients a month and 16 of those were adults, we knew that we needed to leave 16 hours of open chair time for those patients in column 2 of Sherry's schedule. So the new patient adults were seen for an hour, and the doctor then determined if they needed scaling and root planing, if they needed a routine prophylaxis, or sometimes if they need to be referred out, if their teeth were flapping in the breeze and hopeless cases. So we absolutely kept our second dental assistant extremely busy and productive. And that was the key to reducing the doctor's stress, but also producing a lot more, $1,500 to $2,500 a day difference. So you do the math. So when I see a doctor that says, well, I only have one dental assistant, I say, she is good old Bessie on roller skates. She is going to die this year. So if you have 2 chairs and you work out of 2 treatment rooms, you need 2 very well-trained dental assistants. So we need to leave new patient flex time. We also need to leave hygiene flex time. Heaven forbid if I'm a perio patient and you are blocked up in hygiene for the next 6 months and you say, well, we have a lot of broken appointments. Well, let's clear up the broken appointments because they are the kiss of death to every practice. So we don't want to have holes in the schedule. So we have to leave openings, intentional openings for those scaling and route planning and to bring the new patient back within 10 days of their first visit with the practice. And the fourth type of flex time that you need to leave in your schedule is what I call big case dentistry. We left Thursday morning completely open, and it was very scary for me because I was the scheduling coordinator. And we saw all of our new patients on Mondays and Wednesdays. That was the only 2 days we had a second assistant. Our doctor taught at MCV on Tuesdays. So we saw all of our adult new patients on Mondays and Wednesdays in Sherry's schedule. And we left Thursday morning open. My last doctor taught me that if you don't expect to do 1 or 2 big cases a week, you probably won't. So we didn't just block his schedule. If he wasn't scheduled with 2 2-hours or 1 4-hour case for Thursday morning, if it wasn't scheduled by Wednesday noon, I could go to my pending appointment system and pull people who were on the waiting list that had failed an appointment and needed to come in or whatever. So we didn't leave the time open, but our goal was to have Thursday morning as our big case dentistry. So those are the 4 types of flex time that I recommend in scheduling. Hygiene and recare. First of all, I want you to write this down under letter B. Hygiene should be 33% of your gross production, 33% of gross production, which excludes doctor's exam. If you include doctor's exam, hygiene should be 40% of gross production. Should be 40% of gross production. So it doesn't matter to me as your consultant whether you're counting doctor exam in hygiene or on the doctor's side. Most practices count it on the doctor's side, but I still run across a few that still count that as hygiene production. So it should be 33% excluding doctor exam. Another tip under hygiene recare, you need 1 full-time hygienist for every 800 to 1,000 active patients. 1 full-time hygienist for every 800 to 1,000 patients. You also need to reactivate to get the floating recall patients back into hygiene. We could go around the world on what is sitting in the, I call it the sub-practice. That's the practice we don't get to. And when Rhonda Savage, Dr. Rhonda Savage, you'll have a chance to hear her on Saturday, I'm sorry. You'll have a chance to hear Dr. Savage on Saturday. When we were co-consulting, because she bought my consulting business 5 years ago, we were amazed at how wonderful the administrative team members were at doing their daily duties. They know how to answer the telephone in most practices. They know how to greet patients warmly. They know how to engineer the schedule. If they don't, we'll help them. They know how to prevent broken appointments. They know how to present the fee, collect the money, and handle the insurance. They do their daily duties quite well. What they haven't time or training to do is go after the sub-practice that's under the desk. And that's where you have another practice waiting to be tapped. So what are you doing in your own practice? Are you reactivating those patients? Are you bringing them back into hygiene? You see, the patients that you see, the top 33% of your patient base, these are the patients we call healthy adult patients, healthy patients. They would not think of missing their preventive care appointment, and they have clean, healthy mouths, and they take care of their appointments. They keep their appointments, and if they needed any operative, it's probably already done. So those are what we call our true maintenance. That's the top 33%. In the middle of your patient base, the second 1/3 of the practice, these are your patients who need operative. They need it, and in most cases they can afford it, but they're your busy executives, your busy farmers, your busy housewives that turn 6 months into 16 months. So those are the patients that you might be seeing half of. The majority of the practices we do monitoring or evaluations of, Lois Banta, where are you? You would have vouched for this. hygiene is 40 to 55%, and yet they think it's 95%. My goal for every practice in this room is to become 85% scheduled with active patients and inactive patients, 85%. Because the middle group postpone, and they need you, doctors, but it's the lower 1/3 that needs you the most. These are your bombed out mouths down below. These are your, what I call your active, inactive patients. Their attitude is, I'll bother my teeth if my teeth bother me. And so these are the ones who need a ton of dentistry done. And we saw a lot of patients in Richmond that didn't have a lot of money, and I'm sure you see patients in the same situation. But one of the phrases I learned from my doctor years ago is he would sit down with a patient that probably didn't have a lot of money and had never been treated special. And he would look at that patient, male or female, and he'd say, you know, in looking in your mouth, Charles, you've had a lot of what I call break and fix dentistry. And we would like to change that. We would like to introduce you to what we call ideal dentistry because we believe you deserve it, and that's the kind of dentistry that we do here in the office. But please know, we don't have to do it all at one time. We'll work with you. We did a lot of phased dentistry, folks. Phased dentistry. Get them in a good holding pattern so they stop having emergencies, and then you have a patient, not just one generation, but probably 3. I remember one of our patients needed a lot of dentistry, and she was the cashier at the grocery store. She didn't make a lot of money. And we treated her very special, and that was the whole thing. Treat every single person as though they're a piece of gold, because most of those people haven't been treated special. And a lot of people say, oh, we only want the A and B patients, Linda. We don't want the C's and D's. I said, we would have taken an F, because when you're starting a scratch practice in a town with 750 other dentists, you will take dogs, cats, and go-go dancers, but you want the chairs to be filled. So we absolutely treated the less than desirable patients as though they were the mayor of the city. And that makes people come back, not just one generation. The lady at the grocery store, probably 15 years after I didn't work for Dr. Wilson, he called and says, you're not going to believe this. And I'd forgotten her name. She just won the Virginia lottery. And because we treated her so special, she had everybody in the family fixed. He was just going wild for a few months, taking care of all her friends and relatives, because she knew that that was a good value, and we treated her special, and when her money situation changed, she wanted to pay it forward. So we need to have a great hygiene recare system. Reactivation is a must, and if you do not have team members who like to reactivate, there are so many of the systems out there that do this for you today. Lois, wouldn't we have loved to have had Smile Reminder and all the others that do all this for us? The courtesy confirmation calls, the birthday celebrations. Dr. Tanya Brown happens to be my personal dentist and has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And on my birthday, they sent me an email, and it had a video in it, and her whole team popped up from behind the front desk and screamed and blew whistles and horns and wished me a happy birthday. I played it 20 times. I played it for everybody that came to my house. So, you know, the whole bottom line is treat people special, and they'll do business with you. And so hopefully, and the reactivation, if you need, I don't believe in scripts. A lot of consultants talk about script this, script that. How many of you have gotten a phone call recently and you knew they were reading it? It was scripted. You just want to hang up, right? So I believe in giving the team members key words, and I'll underline the key words in something I give them, and I'll say, use your own personality, but this is why we use these 4 words, because they're called action words, and they will get people back. You should have 3 different priorities when you make, 3 objectives when you're making reactivation calls. And when we called the patient, we didn't say, it's been 14 months since your last cleaning, first of all, let's make a note of 3 words you need to quit using in your practice. You never call it a cleaning. I can clean my own teeth and it doesn't cost $200. You don't use checkup. You're past due for your checkup. Well, a checkup to a patient means I need to see the dentist or hygienist to check and see if I'm having a problem. If I'm not having any problems, I don't need a checkup. And so we don't use cleaning, we don't use checkup, and we certainly don't use recall. You're past due for your recall. We recall broken automobiles. So we definitely want to scratch those 3 words. We want to call it the patient's preventive care appointment, their follow-up care appointment, or their continuous care appointment. So when I call Mrs. Jones, who's 14 months past due, I would say, Mrs. Jones, this is Linda from Dr. Wilson's office. In reviewing our charts for 2012, I've noticed that it's been 14 months since your last preventive care appointment. And because your follow-up care, Mrs. Jones, is so important, I'm calling you today to reserve a time before all of our hygiene appointments are gone for the next 90 days. Sound busy, and it's amazing how busy you'll get. Because they'll sit down and make these reactivation calls and they'll say, I called 20 people and I didn't book one single appointment. No wonder you said, do you want to make an appointment? They say no. So we have to be proactive in what we say. This is your I'm calling in regards to your preventive care appointment. It's been 14 months since your last preventive care appointment, and because your follow-up care is so important, I'm calling today to reserve a time before all of our hygiene appointments are gone for the next 3 months. Sound busy, you'll get busier. If you sound desperate, it doesn't work. The second objective, the first objective, of course, is to get the floating recare patient back on the schedule. The second objective is, while we have the person on the phone, don't forget to say, now that we have you scheduled, Mrs. Jones, how about your other family members who also may be past due or not currently seeing a dentist? I was able to get divorced children who had moved back home with their grandchildren. I was able to get all sorts of family members, especially. Here's how the family works. They send the child to see you first. If the kid's like you, mom comes. 2 years later, you might meet the dad. That's how the patients do it. So the third objective is, when we made those reactivation phone calls, if they said, go ahead and put me in your inactive files, we're seeing another dentist. Well, that was like a knife in our heart. Why did we lose this family? So then we would always say, I am so sorry to hear that you and your family are going somewhere else. I know the doctor is going to be even more disappointed than I am. And I'd always say, is there anything that we can do to bring you in on a complimentary consultation? The doctor gave me permission to invite them to come in for a complimentary consultation to clarify or to correct anything that they might have been unhappy. Because, you know, patients don't tell you, they tell 10 other people. And so in talking to the patient, if they said, well, you don't accept our insurance or whatever, then say, well, first of all, if they don't tell you why they aren't coming back, because oftentimes they won't just say why, and maybe they didn't like your hygienist. Maybe they said she was Bloody Mary. She went to my kneecaps to get calculus. I don't think I have. How many times have you ever lost a staff member, and after they leave, the patients tell you? They're not going to say a word while they're there because they can do a number on them. But Hilda the Hun at the front desk, we've all met some of those, right? Turning out more patients away and losing more patients than you poor doctors would ever know. So the third objective is, when I contact the patient and they say, go ahead and put me in your inactive files, we won't be returning, my next statement would be, to complete your clinical record, may I please chart the reason you wish to be inactive. To complete your clinical record. So you're not nosy, you're thorough. You're closing their clinical record. To complete your clinical record, may I please chart the reason you wish to be inactive. Because doctors, at your team meetings once a month, I want the people making these calls, I want them to report to the entire team and to you why we lost 21 patients out of the 57 that I made phone calls to. We want to know. Because if you don't know why you're losing or why you've lost patients, you'll continue to do so for the same reasons. Sometimes you just don't know. The third, and letter C, business system for success, you must have control of your inventory. This is, doctors, one of your few controllable overhead expenses. And I challenge that each one of you monitor closely where your money is going. And there's a lot of embezzlement going on in our profession, 4 or 5 out of 10 dentists right now. And embezzlement can take on a lot of different forms using the internet and Facebook on company time. That's a form of embezzlement. That's just stealing time instead of stealing money, but it is a form of embezzlement. So we need to make sure that you doctors not only sign your own checks and also your bank deposit would go to your home, not to your office to be opened by anyone else. It's not a lack of trust. It's a procedure called good business ethics, monitoring the store. And it is the only controllable overhead. Your dental supplies, doctors, should be 5 to 7% of collections. We always look at overhead numbers on collections. 5 to 7% of collections. Now, if you are a CEREC user or if you are doing implants, please use their supplies as laboratory cost. Implants and CEREC would be considered laboratory costs, not dental supplies, because that throws both numbers off. So implants and CEREC would be considered lab costs. And also, I believe in working with one particular salesperson versus, I know some dentists have their team members spend 20 hours a month comparison shopping everything. And my question is, are you really saving money or wasting a lot of time? Develop a good relationship with your sales rep and let him or her know, I am going to become an exclusive customer and here's what I expect from you and your company. Because if I'm not going to be keeping my budget at this level and never running out of things, and if you don't help me set up a good inventory control system on the computer, I probably won't be your exclusive customer next year. So let them know what your expectations are. And any dental assistant, by the way, who is in charge of clinical supplies, any dental assistant who can keep your supply costs below 5% and never run out of anything will have a star in her crown or his crown when they get to dental heaven. And once I was in a practice in Syracuse, New York, and she had a 4.3, and I said, did you know how great this is? She said, will you please tell my doctor? He's always fussing because I spend too much money. I said, 4.3 is really quite good. I was actually in a practice out in Spokane, Washington, years and years ago, and the supply costs were 14.5%. And when I challenged the doctor, he said, Debbie's in charge of supplies, and Debbie showed me her on deck and her in the basement. She had an entire dental supply house down below. And when I asked her what all this stuff was for, she said, oh, Linda, you're speaking here tomorrow in Spokane, and our dental sales rep is one of my best friends, and he always calls me in advance to tell me when things are on special, and he brings us warm buns when he comes. And I took the doctor to lunch, and I said, do you know how much money, how many warm buns you could have bought last year with $36,000, which is what he had overspent? A basement full of supplies that would outlive their usefulness before their use. But she was in charge. No monitoring. Next is accounts receivable. Lois Banta, I consider her to be one of the greatest AR experts in dentistry. And I also used to be one of the earliest ones that talked about accounts receivable management and how dentistry has changed over the years. When I first started lecturing 34 years ago, it was not uncommon to see 2.5 times your monthly production, 2.5 times your monthly production in AR. Over the years, it went from 2.5 times your monthly down to 2, then 1.5. Remember the 1.5? That was about the time you came in, Lois. It was 1.5 times your monthly production was okay. Now my clients are running somewhere between a half of a month to 3/4 of a month as a comfortable level. And one of the greatest things that happened to dentistry since one of the best things that's happened in accounts receivable management has been patient financing. And if you are not a CareCredit user, I hope that you will become a CareCredit user, because in my opinion, I've been talking about this company for 26 of my 34 years, and I think that they have done more for our profession. I have a lot of financial coordinators that'll say, no, Linda, our doctor really doesn't want us to bring up CareCredit or patient financing because we'd rather not write off the 9.9%. And I say, please change your attitude, doctors. Please change your attitude, financial coordinators, because the last time I checked, 91% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And so that's what happens when you don't make it easy for people to do business with you. I love patient financing. Why? Because when I did it, and Lois did it in the olden days, it was costing our doctor 22% for us to do it in-house, in our time and in the write-offs and in the people that skip town. And I mean, when you use patient financing, there's no recourse to you. You get your check up front and they have to collect. So to me, 9.9 is a low percentage, and on lower amounts it's even 6.9, right, Lois?
Yeah, and you just add it to the cost of doing business. It's not, it's one of your overhead expenses, so if your fees are right-sized, it doesn't cost the practice a lot.
Exactly, exactly. So it's actually an investment, not a cost. So accounts receivable over 90 days should be less than 2%. And I looked at one of the last practices I consulted 6 years ago, and they had 54% of their AR was over 90 days. Anything over 90 days, doctor, you have about a 15% chance of ever seeing the money. And every 30 days, it's going into the next category. So the key is TNT collections, today, not tomorrow. TNT, today, not tomorrow. And I absolutely love to work with practices that have a low accounts receivable. And also one other tip under AR, go back and look at the credit balances that you may have on your books. I consulted a practice in Illinois. She had $21,000 in credit balances, which means her AR was actually $21,000 more than she thought it was. That is not your money. That belongs to your patients, and you should monthly write the checks and get rid of your credit balances, unless, of course, they're under a big case and they've paid some in advance. That's different, but we're talking about money that's on the books, that's a credit balance that's been there a long time. Letter E is marketing. This is another one of the another one of the systems. I believe that marketing should be 1/3 external and 2/3 internal. External marketing is what we do to make the telephone ring. Internal marketing is what we do for our patients to show them that we love them and we're going to take really good care of you. It's the gifts and the little nice things that you do. Dr. Brown has one of the most beautiful offices, and one of the things, Dr. Brown, I haven't mentioned this to you, but as a patient, she has a beautiful photography of patients all over her office, and in her powder room she has 4 guys from Discus smiling at you when you're sitting in her bathroom. And that was one thing I was going to say, we need to put different pictures in. That's why I go and stay for a while, Tanya. I'm only laughing, I'm only kidding. But anyway, she does a lot of internal marketing, and you cannot be too nice to your patients. Once they are your patients, they need to be shown that you appreciate them. One of the fun things that I love to do, once a month we had a patient appreciation day, and we also had a marketing budget. We knew that we were going to spend, back then it was 3% of our monthly collections on marketing. And we had a marketing committee of all of the staff with, one should be from the administrative team, one should be from hygiene, one from assisting, and if you have a practice manager. So they make up the marketing committee. And Doctor allowed us to buy the gifts that we would give away on Patient Appreciation Day. So we had 31 numbers in a nice vase at the front desk, and on the last day of the month, we pulled a number until it was a patient day next month, and that became our Patient Appreciation Day. And every patient that left with a $10 or $15 gift. Wasn't a lot, but wow, they were so appreciative. I remember Valentine's Day, we'd go to the florist and get long stem red roses and baby's breath and beautiful ribbons and green paper, and every patient that left the working day before Valentine's Day left with a long stem red rose. And somebody asked me once, did you give them to the guys? And I said, of course they stopped. They pretended they stopped at the florist on the way home. So we bailed out a lot of husbands on that day, or boyfriends. So yes, we had 1/3 external, 2/3 internal. What do you do for your patients once they become your patients to create raving fans? That's what internal marketing is. Next, we need to have staff meetings, and I recommend that I propose that all of you go back and think about the sub-practice that I talked about and ask yourself, do we take the time throughout the month or the week to work on the practice instead of just treating patients every minute that we're there? So doctors, if you and your team members are in the practice every hour that patients are in the practice, I can assure you there's a lot of things not being done. And that's how you go after the sub-practice. In 1987, our company was one of the Inc. 500 fastest growing privately held companies, and I decided to walk around and talk to the other CEOs of these other fast growing companies. And they thought I was from the magazine because I had a little clipboard, and I'd say, if you could give me 3 minutes of your time, what's the one thing that puts your company on the fast track? Would you share that with me? And they all thought I was one of the editors from the magazine, so they were happy to talk to me. I was one of them. And I kept hearing these words, if I had only one thing that put our company in the fastest growing fast track, it would have to be our in-house training. And I said, can you explain that? Because I had not heard of in-house training. So I brought that back into dentistry and said, we need to go back to our practices, this will scare you to death, and X off 2 hours a week and call that non-patient time. If I could get every dentist in dentistry to do the 2 hours a week, their practice would explode. So I want you to have 2 hours the first week of each month to do what we call a health of the practice statistical data team meeting. We have 3 or 4 days to close out our numbers for the month. We have 3.5 weeks to work on our new goal for this month. So we have a health of the practice team meeting week 1 for 2 hours. Every member of your team has to stand up and give a 3-minute personal progress report on what they have personally done last month to make this practice better. They all have a personal three things to report on. The hygienists give 3 reports, like how many scaling and root planings did we have last month? How many open units of chair time did I have last month? We want that number to be reduced. We want the scaling and root planings to be increased. Also, what is my average dollars per day produced in my hygiene room? We want the dental assistants to give 3 reports. We want the scheduling coordinator. I want to know, how many new patients did we have last month? Where did they come from? Is our marketing working? I want to know how many no-shows we had last month and how many the scheduling coordinator was able to fill on short notice. I also want to know from the doctor, what is our production last month? What did we write off last month? And what are our collections last month? And how does that compare with the same month a year ago? When I talk to doctors about sharing certain numbers with their team, a lot of them get really nervous. Oh, Linda, I would never tell my staff what we produce. Well, doctor, I hate to tell you, they were born at night, not last night. They already know what you do, and they assume it all goes home with you-know-who if you don't talk about it. So they need to know. There are certain health of the practice numbers nobody knows except you, your spouse, and your advisors. But there's a lot of numbers you need to be sharing with your team. So we want these personal progress reports. Week number 2 and week number 4 of our block of time is called organizational time. Every member of your team should have on your desk next Friday a list of all the things they could work on if they didn't have patients 4 hours a month. Week 2 and week 4, non-patient time, organizational time. Doctors, what would be on your own list? Time to work on treatment plans, time to return non-urgent phone calls, time to work on dental study, dental society information, or time to open the mail, time to correspond with the specialist or other dentist. So there's just a lot of things that don't get done in a dental office completely, and we don't ever have time to bring that sub-practice back to the surface. We need 4 hours of organizational time, and everybody should make a list. This is not coffee and donuts time. This is roll up our sleeves and work on projects. Work on marketing projects. Work on creating new forms. Work on all sorts of things. Reactivating the patients, calling the past dues, working on your website. I mean, there's just so many things that you need to do. And week number 3 is probably the most important block of non-patient time, and that is called our in-house training, our people training our people. And it's very simple how it works. Doctors, I want you to give a 30-minute table clinic on what you consider to be clinical dentistry for your team. I want you to become the professor and teach them what it is, what type of crowns do we do? Why do we place an implant? Why did we do this on Mrs. So-and-so versus that? Do you ever have time to talk clinical dentistry, and especially to the front office people who are selling you every time they answer the phone? So doctors, you have the first 30 minutes. It's called clinical dentistry for the team. Some of it is even watching a DVD, or you take them into the treatment room and actually do hands-on. You can do a lot of things, teaching them clinical dentistry. The second half hour is given by your hygiene department. The third is by your clinical assistants, and the fourth is your administrative team. People training people. I can't tell you how much more productive you would be on a weekly basis if you had that 2 hours of non-patient time. So that would be staff meetings. Also, I do believe in having a morning huddle. When I spoke in Australia, they thought I was proposing a morning cuddle. They got real excited about what we do over in the U.S. So the morning huddle. And the morning huddle should be the scheduling coordinator calling on the clinical team to go over their schedule. And I'm a big stickler for this, and this is a very important one. I spoke to a doctor's wife yesterday with my new service called AskLindaMiles.com, and she said, how do you get the staff to stay accountable? And I said, it's very simple. You outline your expectations, and then you follow up. You see, doctors, if you hired me and said, Linda, we need you to reduce our over 90-day accounts receivable, and we're going to give you 90 days to do that. I can do that, but guess what? If no one, your office administrator or you, never check back with me, even for 10 minutes, and ask me how my project's going, guess how long I'm going to be excited about my project? About 3 weeks. So keeping people accountable is outlining your expectations and following up. And I am a big stickler for this, and this is going to be one of the best nuggets I hope you'll take home. Every day, without fail, I want your clinical team members, even if they're a temporary that's only there 1 day a week, I want them to look at their patient records for tomorrow and prepare for their morning huddle report by doing a 2-minute chart audit on every single chart that's going to be seen tomorrow. Heaven forbid when you doctors walk in and you are sitting down more or less blind because you know, after a while all patients run together, do they not? So if your clinical team members are doing a chart audit, they're looking for 3 things. Past due films, we could go around the world 3 times on those. Does your team even know what your x-ray or your radiograph protocol is? Because if I worked for you and I didn't know that you wanted bite wings once a year and you wanted an FMX every 36 months, I probably wouldn't know this patient has been 7 years without full mouth series. So we need to look for past due films. We need to look for dentistry that has been presented and is incomplete. And we also need to look at the date of their last recare visit and their family members. I mean, the computer software is fantastic. It gives you all this information. So doing a 2-minute per patient chart audit, you'll see a lot of team members that say, Linda, we don't have 16 minutes to do that. I have 8 patients a day. I don't know where I'm going to find these 16 minutes. I bet everybody in this room wastes at least 16 minutes a day, do we not? That we could find a way to do that. So prepare them for the morning huddle by having them do the chart audit the day before, and then they are going down the list and say, we're going to do this, we're going to add that, we need to also do this. And a lot of the team members say, well, Linda, their insurance will only pay for a full-mouth series of films every 5 years, so they won't want them. And my question is, are we doing what's best for the patient or what's best for the insurance company? So how do you present that to a patient? You would say, Mrs. Jones, you are one of our fortunate patients. Doctor wants to do a full-mouth series of films, radiographs every 3 years. Your benefit plan will cover every other one. The good news is you only have to pay for every other one. A lot of our patients pay for all of them. So you just let them know that they only have to pay for every other one. Instead of saying, oh, their insurance is not going to cover that, I know they won't want to have those done. So sometimes we have to do what's best for the patient. We should always do what's best for the patient, not what's best for their wallet. As far as overhead control, I want to give you some other numbers that I want you to go back and actually become a consultant to your own practice. Ideal overhead is 55 to 65% in a general practice. That is called ideal overhead. Ideal overhead. What we typically see as consultants is 65 to 75%. And unfortunately, we often, not often, but we sometimes see it in the 80 percentile. That is professional suicide, by the way. So we need to take a look at overhead. Staff salaries. Please don't ever refer to your staff as you are my biggest overhead. Please always say to the team, you are my greatest investment in the whole wide world. You see, something that makes money for you is an investment. Something that you buy and don't use, like technology you don't use, that's overhead. That's a waste. So staff salaries, somewhere between 22 and 24%, excluding payroll taxes, because oftentimes in a corporation, the doctor payroll taxes are lumped in with the staff, so that really throws that number off. 22 to 24%, excluding payroll taxes and benefits. Now, if you have a bonus plan, that is included because that goes on their payroll record. So 22 to 24% is the, and the reason we don't include benefits is they vary so greatly between practice to practice. And dental supplies, we've already mentioned 5 to 7% of gross collections rather. Facility, your facility cost should be somewhere between 4 to 6% of your monthly collections. 4 to 6%. In New York, they thought I said 46%, and in New York, it is about that way, in New York City. Your marketing should be, it depends. If you have already a healthy number of new patients, 25 to 35 new patients a month, you would need to spend less. If you have a lower number of new patients and you don't have a strong patient base, please make a note of this. A healthy solo practice has 15 to 2,500 active charts. When your practice gets over 2,500 charts, then it becomes more than a one-doctor practice, especially if it gets up to around 4,000. That's a two-doctor practice. And I see some doctors that have 800 charts, and they'll say, Linda, I'm so excited, I'm bringing in an associate. And I'll say, do you mind if I ask why? Well, I'm going to my 10th year reunion from dental school, and I want to say I have an associate. I think that'll sound good. Well, that's great, but which one of you is going to starve to death? And then I had another doctor who was my age and said, my wife and I have reached the magic age where we're going to travel 10 weeks out of the year. That's why I brought in an associate. I said, but you only have 975 patients. What are you going to do with him or her the other 42 weeks? So please don't bring in an associate unless you merge another practice and have an instant influx of patients. Don't bring in another doctor unless you have more patients than you can physically take care of yourself. Okay, the marketing we've already talked about, and lab. Lab is one of the most important numbers a consultant will ever look at because it tells us whether your case acceptance is powerful or not good at all. So we know exactly what you need help with and your team needs help with if your lab is low. Show me a practice that has a 3, 4, or a 5% laboratory cost, and I will show you a practice that's either doing offshore laboratories or their case acceptance is not great. And the ideal figure is 8 to 11% of your collections. You want to see your lab fees go up because that means case acceptance, and you want to see your hygiene numbers go up. So here's a figure that I want you to go back and do, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. I want you to go back and write down the number of active patient records that you have in your central files. Number of active patient records. Multiply that figure times 2. That represents 2 preventive care appointments per year. Some have more, some have less. But active patients times 2, then divide by 12. Active patients times 2 and divide by 12. So if you have 2,000 charts, that's 4,000 active recare visits. That is 333 a month. So we go into the practice and they're seeing 125 a month. We know their hygiene is less than 50%. So that's a good way to go back and check your own. So overhead control, marketing and lab should be 8.5%. Real quick on the last page, leadership and ownership. This is another necessity. We want leadership at all levels. The doctor cannot be the only leader. We want every member of your team to feel like they are contributing, and we want them to develop leadership leadership at all levels. Being accountable shows strong leadership. Follow through. Speaking favorably about my doctor in and out of the office, that shows leadership. Show me a person that whines, moans, groans, and gossips about their doctor, and I'll show you somebody that is anti-marketing the practice to the max. My whole thing is if you're not happy, don't accept the paycheck. Go somewhere else. Have you ever met anybody that nothing will ever make them happy? Yeah, we've all met those people. So we also need to remember that leaders live in a glass house, which means doctors, as the primary leader of your practice, every move that you make, you are being watched by your team first and your patients second. So if you say no more internet, no more personal phone calls, no more this and no more that, but you keep doing it, guess what? That shows that you're not part of the team. So if you set guidelines, practice policies, guess who has to be the leader of adhering to those policies? You also have to have outstanding communication skills over the telephone, checking in, checking out, and chairside. If you work in a group practice, the doctor-to-doctor communication has to be very, very strong. Show me a practice that's in trouble. I'll show you 98% of the time it's a lack of communication somewhere or a communication failure somewhere. Also, you must have excellent case acceptance. We've already talked about you must have benefit to the buyer. You must have excellent communication skills. The staff's role in setting the stage for case acceptance. When a team member says, I haven't had a raise in 2 years, I'll say, how do you feel about, I do think raises are important, by the way, but raises must be earned and can't just be expected. I can't walk up to my doctor and say, I've been here another year, where's my raise? So we really have to take a look at what's the value? What is my compensation based on? And I think if your team members know what their value to your practice is, they'll get better in all 3 areas. The first area is their ability to do the job that's on their job description. That is their first value to your practice. But that's not their only value. And they think, well, I haven't had a raise in 2 years and I'm really a great hygienist, or I'm really a great clinical assistant, or I'm really a great front desk person. The 2 other areas that they must have in equal doses, number 2, they also have to get along well with other people. They have to get along well with their coworkers, their patients, the parents of their patients. They have to get along well with other people because this is a people business. And last but not least, every member of your team has to know how to set the stage for case acceptance, which is the cheapest marketing plan in the world because it doesn't cost a dime, but it can absolutely increase your practice by tens of thousands of dollars per month. And that is the team that is absolutely bragging about you, bragging about your dentistry, and saying things chairside like, Mrs. Miles, let me be the first to congratulate you on having that full coverage crown. I know you've thought about it for a couple of years. Let me tell you that you have made a very wise decision in your total health by making this investment. Or do they just sit and talk about the weather, the vacation, their children, or whatever? So please write this down. Communication should be 75% dental education from every single one of us throughout the day, 75% dental education, and 25% social chit-chat. And in most practices, it's the exact opposite. We'll see 75% social interaction and 25% dental education. And those numbers have to be reversed. And in closing today's opening session, I just wanted to say, please don't give up and don't lose hope and don't get discouraged. And remember the phrase that I learned from Zig Ziglar, it's often the last key on the ring that opens the lock. So don't give up. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.